Hey guys, so this is what we would have gotten into. We had a really good discussion about anticipatory socialization and reference groups. Hopefully you feel comfortable with those concepts. Again, anytime you anticipate to move into a new stage of life, you're going to have to re-socialize. Then you have your reference groups. Those are the people that you are looking at with an eye of that's what you would like to become. Throughout your entire life, you are socialized. It is a never-ending process. Every time something changes, you have to figure out how the world operates in that fashion. Several stages that we'll talk about. The first one is childhood. And if you look at the pictures below, normally in class we'd have this really good discussion about what is childhood today. Well, you have your very first picture here down at the bottom, and it would have been the 1800s, maybe the 1700s, depending on what technology they're using. But that would have been that childhood. And in fact, it wouldn't have been a very unique and distinct part of life. It would have just been working until you started to have a family of your own. You move into the modern world, and it depends on where you are globally. A childhood in America is not the same as a childhood other places. And that doesn't mean that there aren't places that have exactly the same kind of sense of childhood that we do, but it does mean that there are some places that have a distinctly different sense of childhood. And then you get into that last cartoon, and this one just feels so much like what American life is right now, which is the overscheduled child. The parent who is kind of just monitoring their lives, trying to make sure that they're getting into everything and the best of everything, and pressure, pressure, pressure. So I'm sorry, Billy, Johnny's got hours of homework. Tomorrow there's soccer, swimming lessons, math tutor, Taibo on Tuesday, science camp this weekend, Japanese lessons, piano. I think he can squeeze you in for a half hour of chasing frogs in the pond 2 weeks from Sunday. Unfortunately, I feel like that even for my kids, and I try very hard to limit that kind of insane pressure, is what they live with. We're at the soccer fields all the time. They love soccer, but friends will come over and they want to play, and we have to say, sorry, we have practice. Sorry, we have homework. Sorry, we have. And so even with kids with not a ton of things, their childhood is a lot more scheduled. It's a lot more rigorous than maybe when I was a kid. So we would normally go through and we'd look at these and go, all right, which one represents an American childhood? Which one is least like an American childhood? How is childhood socially constructed? And it depends. It depends on your socioeconomic level. It depends on what your parents focused on and what was important. It depends on the generation in which you're growing up in. It depends, it depends, it depends. And when we look at this is just true for any kind of group of people. They can look at these and they can see elements. Having gone through this in class before, I've had boys, more often boys, tell me that the young boy holding the firearm reminded them of their childhood, either because they went hunting, and obviously not with that, or they played Nerf battles. And so that might be part of that kind of idea of childhood for them. Unfortunately, this would be a child soldier in Palestine, so a little different. I remember riding my bike in the street without a helmet. That might be my kind of memory, or going outside and playing without any shoes on. It depends on what you look at, but what we do see across the board in all of these pictures, save the child soldier, is that really childhood in America is meant to be a time free of worry, a time that is supposed to be where you are not hampered with the same responsibilities of an adolescent or an adult. So childhood has become an increasingly separate phase of life with the Industrial Revolution. When machines started to take over a lot of these kind of smaller jobs, children were freed up from work and they were now seen as little people that needed guidance. And so we have this shift in industrialization from working to schooling, from being mini adults, which they never were, to being people that needed to be protected and guided. If you have a chance, and I know it's not going to be the hyperlink won't work, and I'll try and put it in the description below. If you define your adolescence, there's a video called Look Up, and this was suggested to me by a student, so it's not me trying to be preachy, but it talks about what we miss when we're so deeply involved in our phones. The human connection, the small things. I'm glad I have to teach this every year because it reminds me as an adult that I would rather watch my kids play soccer than be on the other end of my phone snapping photos and trying to record it, because I miss it. I miss the action. I miss really taking in everything. I always laugh that I'm the worst mom when it comes to, taking pictures and solidifying like the moments, but it's because I remind myself annually about how important it is for me to be present and to actually make those connections and be there and to kind of unplug. And I'm hoping that my kids start to learn those lessons too. With adolescence, adolescence is this time period of you are old enough to know better, but you're not old enough to be an adult. You have conflicting messages constantly. You are too old to be acting like a child, but too much of a child to be acting so old. And it is a really kind of strange phase in life. Not only is your brain acting crazy and trying to reformat and re-regulate and do all this other stuff, and that being the major machinery that controls who you are as a human, but the world is changing and there's expectations and there's all sorts of rationalizations about who you are and what you should do and how you should be. So there's increased feelings of pressure. What are you going to be in the next decade? And I'm not trying to stress you guys out, but in the next decade, you guys are going to be 27 or 28. In the next decade, you will have moved through a huge amount of change in life. And we do look at you as children, but then we also look at you as adults, and there's that conflict there. You get more chances to make decisions, and then there's the pressure to make the right decision. Again, like everything else, adolescence is something that's deeply impacted by your social class. If you are low income, low socioeconomic, very poor, 18 might be the time that you expect to leave the home and get a job. It might be the time that you become a true 100% adult. If you are middle income, middle class, you might assume that you still have another 4 to 6 years of schooling ahead, and that means you have 4 to 6 years of still not being fully responsible. If you join the military, expect that you will come out of that an adult, while 6 months before you were a kid, and you will go see your high school friends and you will notice that there's a very different kind of way that you view the world. So there are times where this isn't a defined endpoint. You don't hit 18 and become an adult. It depends. We've constructed a new term called transitional adulthood, and this is meant to hit that gap time between the end of high school and true independence. Because most teenagers, whether it's because of socioeconomic reasons or education reasons or whatever, most teens still rely on their parents through their college years, through the first few years maybe of a career. Maybe if they don't go into college or a career right away, whatever that gap time is between trying to figure out where they are and where they're going to be. They live apart from their parental control, but they're not truly independent. Maybe the parents pay for bills, help out a bit, or they live apart, but they come back home on breaks, holiday breaks or summer vacation. This transitional adulthood is kind of an extended adolescence. There's more adult responsibility, but still a reliance on parents. When we look at times of economic downturn, this transitional adulthood extends longer. So for your generation, and it still holds fairly true, many of you, when you finish college, may move right back in with your parents. You might have to live there for a little bit until you get your first career going. Some of you won't, but we see that when jobs are scarce, transitional adulthood is another time period that extends a little bit longer. So with transitional adulthood, like I said, you may return to living at home. With transitional adults, they face these kind of issues with trying to secure what we call a rites of passage. And so when I say rites of passage for a transitional adult, in your head, what does it mean to become a real adult, like an adult? Saying it 17 times, I recognize, doesn't change the fact that, I'm still asking you the same question. Well, for most people, adulthood is defined by true independence, which usually means living on your own, either purchasing a home or having your own apartment, not living with, 15 different friends, but, kind of standing on your own 2 feet, paying your own bills. Usually it means a commitment to a relationship, and that commitment to a relationship usually leads towards family, and it means solidifying a career. Now, understand that these are not absolutes, that these are generalities, and these are socially constructed ideas of what it means to become an adult. Then we get to our middle years, and I am smack dab in the middle of my middle years. I will be 42 here in a month. And when we talk about that, your early middle years, 30 to 49, well, there's a lot of stability usually. You've gone through those early transitional years and you probably have a career. By 30, you are probably in a secure relationship. And again, these are probablys. You have probably started family planning. So there's a good amount of stability. And while that sounds boring, I will tell you at a certain point in your life, boring becomes wonderful. Predictability becomes wonderful. Things like divorce, unemployment, can lead to instability, and often the responsibilities associated with being a parent, well, that can also make this time period a little more hectic. We will say that it can be particularly stressful for women in the middle years, and the question is why? And that's because women don't necessarily cut back on the domesticated responsibilities while still taking on the full-time employment responsibilities. So you hit kind of double, it's twofold. You take on really kind of two full careers. That doesn't mean that men don't step up or that men don't also participate in this, but traditionally across the board in the United States, you will still see that women take on more of, or the majority of, the domesticated responsibilities: cooking, cleaning, taking care of the children, and also simultaneously taking on full-time employment. When we get to middle adulthood, so 50 to 64, you have this kind of reorientation. You start to look at retirement. You become more reflective in what you've done with your life. You start to have a greater kind of appreciation and desire to do things with the younger generation, to guide them, to help. So you'll see a lot of people get deeply involved in things like volunteer activities in their later adulthood. You'll also see that they have the time, usually because of retirement. Retirement is 55 plus, and most people don't retire until their 60s and maybe even their 70s. But there's a term called sandwich generation. People in their middle adulthood, so later middle adulthood, get sandwiched between responsibilities of taking care of their adult children who may be in college and taking care of their adult parents who may be coming into kind of really late adulthood and needing enhanced care. So again, there's another kind of socialization process of how to be a parent to adult children while also being the child of an adult parent who needs additional help. And getting old isn't as old as you thought. I know I mentioned in class that my husband never ever strikes me as someone who's almost 50. I just think he's super cute. But a lot of the celebrities that many of you kind of follow and like are in their middle adulthood. Mark Harmon from NCIS, that's him at 62. I stopped adjusting these pictures. Christy Brinkley, I think she may have actually made a deal with the devil to look like that at 60, because I would have been happy looking like that at like 15. John Stamos at 51. And then 65 is the new 25. I don't know. Maybe I was trying to be funny. Betty White is timeless. She is amazing and the best. People aren't slowing down. There's no, grandma and grandpa sitting, on the front porch, sipping sweet tea. A lot of people are taking these older years and still being incredibly active. So there's an increasing life expectancy, and people don't view themselves as old really until closer to their 70s now. So we have transitional older years now from 65 to 75. And people may start to feel time closing in at this point. The big risk with retirement is the idea of isolation. You no longer have that thing that connects you to other people, the purpose to get up in the day. And I think we've all felt that during long summer breaks, like this most recent one. Like, I want a reason to get up. I want something to do. I want to have an interaction with people. Those are important things to have. Women can be really vulnerable because we often live longer than our spouses. And so that can be a really big kind of isolator. Yes, you have your children and your children love you, but your children leave and they start their own lives. They start to have their own families, their own responsibilities, their own things. And the loss of a spouse can be really, really damaging. It can really be very difficult to deal with because it may leave someone feeling very, very isolated. As dark and disturbing as it is, anytime I have ever thought of my kids going off to college and starting their own lives, my one kind of happy thought is that I will be okay because I will have my best friend with me. So to know that at some point, no matter what we do, nature will take its course, it's a very scary thing because I want my kids to go have independent, wonderful lives because I've chosen the person I want to be with. And for either, that can be a really isolating feeling to know that that person is no longer with you. So if you have grandparents, especially if you have grandparents that are widowed, check in on them. This is the last thing we would have talked about, and this is the idea of how death takes place in a society. And it is a process more than an event. Most often, a lot of people have lead up. They know that there's something happening. Someone has become ill, but in other times it can be an instantaneous thing, like in the case of accidents. But to go through death, whether it is something you were preparing for or something that just kind of happens, it's not a short event. It comes in kind of stages. Now, here's the thing I will tell you. Everything that I'm going to talk about here with Elisabeth Kübler-Ross and the 5 stages of death and dying, the 5 stages of grief, the 5 stages of, all of this has been disproven, and it's been disproven for this simple reason. Not everyone covers every single one of these stages. Not everyone goes in the stages in the order in which they are listed, and there might actually be some stages that aren't talked about that people may experience. So she says that the first stage is denial, that let's say you are given a diagnosis and they tell you it's terminal. The first thing you'll say is, no, you've read the wrong report. And if it's for a family member, you'll go, no, you're a horrible doctor, you don't know what you're doing. Then the next is anger, and it might be anger at the doctor, it might be anger at the diagnosis, it might be anger at the person, it might be anger at, God or whoever your, deity is, but it's anger. And then it might be, I would give anything if. I would do anything. I will pay anybody. And you might bargain. Then you might get very sad and go, this is going to happen. And then you might have acceptance and go, all right, well, this is how everyone goes, and it's my time, or everyone has to. The problem is that it doesn't always happen this way, and it's very diagnostic. It's telling people how they should grieve. Some people have acceptance. People with very deep religious faith might not negotiate. They might not have the anger. They may not even have the denial. They may get sad and they may accept. Some people may never get angry. Some people, and there are some that we might not even talk about, like relief or joy. If you watch someone suffer for a very long time and then they pass away, your first reaction might not be anger. It might be a sense of they're no longer suffering. So when we talk about things like death and dying, it's a little more complex than what Kübler-Ross had originally stated. And you guys have your reading about the myth of this theory that should fill in any of the gaps. Today, fear and anxiety about death are more common, but acceptance and communication also more common. We expect people to talk about it. Some new approaches, one would be the hospice movement, and this is aimed at letting people spend their last few days in their home while still getting quality care. So instead of being in a hospital bed, you get to be in your own bed. You get to be surrounded by your family, your friends, your things, the things that make you comfortable. And the idea is literally to kind of make this transition for people as comfortable as possible. And grieving doesn't always have the same social roles. Support groups are more common. There's more understanding. I know I haven't told you guys this, but I lost an uncle last weekend who I was very close to, and unfortunately I couldn't fly back to Minnesota for the funeral, but I definitely got an insane number of texts from my cousins at like 1 o'clock in the morning because they were throwing like a crazy Irish party. And when I say cousins, I'm one of 33 cousins on my father's side, so there was at least, between cousins and spouses, there was probably about 50 people just celebrating his life, my Uncle Kevin. My family had, at least on that side, any of the funerals we've had have always ended in like some of the best parties I've ever attended, with lots of tears, lots of Irish music, and lots of laughing. And so from an outsider's perspective, it doesn't look like grieving, but it is. All right, so that's what we would have covered in class. You guys should be reading Myth 10 tonight and getting that into me, and hopefully you had that done during class time. But again, the due date stands. If you have any questions, please let me know. Again, this week, you guys have your quiz, you have this, and then please make sure that if you are missing any work, quizzes, or anything else, even if there's a zero, the zero is a placeholder. It is not an absolute zero. So get your work in. Second quarter ends next Friday.